Wonder what happens when a guy in a $5,000 suit fires the one person holding the company's lifeline. I mean, a federal security token issued exclusively under my legal name. By firing me, my new boss unknowingly swallowed a live grenade. I never screamed or begged, I just smiled and walked away. Because destroying an arrogant fool simply means letting him build his own scaffold while you sip bourbon and watch his system collapse on live television. Hello to all our wonderful listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. I want to sincerely thank you for being here, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with absolutely zero operating budget, meaning we will not be uploading any new videos here for the foreseeable future. Instead, we are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. So if you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. To hear exclusive, real, and even better stories with much longer runtimes and highly detailed situations that we simply cannot make public on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors all in one story. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's absolute disaster of a corporate blunder as we follow the story of Hadley Foster. My name is Hadley Foster. I am 36 years old, and for a long time, I was the quietest, most invisible person in the executive branch of Aegis MedTech Solutions. Aegis was a massive medical technology corporation, the kind of titan that built software for hospital heart rate monitors, intensive care life support systems, and automated surgical machinery. Our products kept thousands of human beings breathing and their hearts beating every single day. My official title was Senior Medical Cybersecurity Compliance Approver. It sounds like a boring, bureaucratic nightmare of a job, and to be perfectly honest, it absolutely was. However, in the realm of federal medical regulations, boring is what keeps you out of federal prison. I was the one and only person at Aegis MedTech Solutions who held a physical federal security token, legally registered under my own legal name and tied directly to my biometrics. This token contained the highest-level cryptographic license issued by the Food and Drug Administration. Whenever our brilliant engineers created a new software update for a life support machine, they could not just push it to the hospitals over the internet. The law required a registered human being to audit the code, verify its security, and digitally sign off on the update using that federal token, without my digital signature. Any software patch or new device the company tried to sell was completely illegal to operate on American soil. Then came Trent Vance. Trent was our brand new vice president of operations, freshly imported from a trendy Silicon Valley startup. He wore $5,000 tailored suits, drank green juices, and worshipped at the altar of artificial intelligence. Trent was fundamentally addicted to hollow corporate buzzwords. Every time he opened his mouth, he talked about synergizing our workflows, trimming the fat, and creating a more agile corporate structure. He despised the slow, deliberate legal protocols of the medical field. To Trent, regulations were just suggestions made by old people who did not understand the future. Our quiet, underlying conflict reached a boiling point over a new software update for our flagship cardiac monitors. The engineering team had rushed the code, and during my audit, I found a catastrophic security vulnerability. If a malicious hacker exploited this flaw, they could remotely turn off heart monitors in entire hospital wings. Naturally, I refused to approve the update and denied my federal signature. Trent was absolutely furious. He stormed into my office, slammed his hands on my desk, and yelled, "You are not protecting us, Hadley. You are just a stone wall blocking innovation and costing us millions in delayed releases." His ultimate revenge arrived on a gloomy Friday morning. I was called up to the Human Resources Department. I walked into the glass office to find a very pale human resources representative sitting next to Trent, who was smiling like a lottery winner. Trent leaned back in his leather chair and proudly informed me that they were terminating my employment effective immediately. His grand justification was that he was automating the entire compliance department by replacing me with an advanced artificial intelligence software suite. He boasted that eliminating my role would save the company $150,000 in annual salary. I sat there in the sterile office, looking at this incredibly arrogant man, and I realized something completely mind-blowing. Trent had absolutely no idea how federal medical law actually worked. He genuinely believed that an algorithm could take over my job. He did not realize that an artificial intelligence does not have a pulse, does not have legal personhood, cannot pass an FBI background check, and therefore cannot hold a federal security clearance. By firing me and replacing me with a computer program, he was not just making a bad management decision, he was actively stripping Aegis MedTech Solutions of its only legal authority to distribute medical software. He was blinding his own company and rendering their entire product line illegal. A gentler soul might have attempted to caution him. A more compassionate individual might have outlined the legal risks and pleaded to preserve their position. However, when someone delivers the instrument of their own downfall, you don't highlight the weakness in their setup. You simply give them space and allow nature to take its course. I saw his catastrophic oversight, and I decided to welcome it with an eerie composure. "I understand," I said calmly. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. I simply reached across the table, picked up the fancy company pen, and signed my severance package. I walked out of the glass walls of human resources and navigated the familiar gray maze of cubicles back to my desk. I did not linger to chat. I did not draft a sentimental, company-wide farewell email about new chapters and fond memories. It took me exactly 14 minutes to pack up 7 years of my professional life into a single brown cardboard box. The sheer speed and cold efficiency of my departure sent a very clear message, and a few of the veteran engineers immediately noticed the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Marcus, a senior systems developer who actually understood the immense gravity of network compliance, stopped by my desk. He looked down at my box, then looked up at me, his face turning a noticeable shade of pale. "You are leaving," Marcus whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the executive suites. "Right now, who is going to sign the cryptographic keys for the new patch deployment?" I carefully placed my favorite ceramic coffee mug into the box and looked him dead in the eye. "That is entirely up to Trent now. Marcus, I highly recommend you double-check your code, because there is no safety net anymore." Before I officially surrendered my company-issued laptop to the Information Technology Department, I had one final, legally mandated task to perform. It was a strict regulatory requirement, but it was also the exact mathematical mechanism that would seal their fate. I sat down, booted up the system, and inserted my physical security token into the drive one last time. I opened an encrypted browser and navigated to the highly secure portal of the Food and Drug Administration. Next, I opened a separate, secure tab for the Department of Homeland Security Cyber Infrastructure Registry. My fingers moved over the keyboard with mechanical, practiced precision. I located the active vendor profiles for the corporation. There, shining brightly on the high-resolution screen, was my name listed as the sole legally responsible person. I clicked the red revocation tab. The system immediately paused, asking for my final biometric scan to authorize the unlinking process. I pressed my right thumb to the glowing scanner. The screen flashed a brilliant green. In less than 60 seconds, I had officially scrubbed my identity, my legal license, and my federal liability from every single project they had in the pipeline. What Trent did not know, and what he would soon find out the hard way, was that this specific action triggered a silent, automated protocol deep within the government servers. A 14-day federal countdown had just begun. The law was absolute and unforgiving. A medical device manufacturer operating without a registered compliance agent is given exactly 14 days of a grace period to find and authenticate a legally viable replacement. If the clock hits zero and no new human agent is registered, the federal network automatically initiates a system-wide block, no software updates, no security patches, complete, inescapable digital paralysis. I wiped the hard drive of my laptop, handed it over to a confused technician, and took the elevator down to the main lobby. By 4 o'clock that very same afternoon, Trent had ordered premium catered champagne to be delivered to the executive lounge. He threw an impromptu mixer to celebrate the supposed modernization of their organizational structure. He was practically vibrating with pride, taking full credit for trimming the bureaucratic fat and ushering in the era of artificial intelligence. I stood by my car in the damp parking lot, leaning against the driver's side door, and looked up at the glowing windows of the 15th floor. I could almost imagine the sound of clinking crystal glasses and the hollow laughter of executives who had absolutely no idea they were standing on a trapdoor. I simply smiled, turned the key in the ignition, and drove away into the evening traffic. I did not spend my weekend mourning my lost salary or worrying about my future. On Monday morning, I filed the necessary articles of incorporation and officially launched Foster Secure Tech. It was my own independent legal consulting firm, fully licensed and ready for business. I signed a lease on a modest, quiet office space on the second floor of a beautifully restored brick building downtown. I bought a premium espresso machine, set up a secure private server, and began reaching out to my extensive network of industry contacts. I was no longer a corporate pawn kept in a dark corner. I was a free agent holding all the necessary cards. While I was drinking excellent espresso and drafting new client proposals, the invisible fault lines at my former employer were already beginning to fracture. The federal automated systems are relentless, and they do not sleep. By day 3 of the countdown, the government servers began firing off automated warning emails directly to the corporate compliance inbox. However, there was no one left to read those warnings. Trent, thoroughly convinced that his new artificial intelligence software would handle all the heavy lifting, had casually assigned the monitoring of the legacy compliance inbox to a 22-year-old marketing intern. This poor kid had a degree in communications, not a background in cybersecurity or federal law. When he opened the inbox and saw messages with subject lines full of complex federal identifier codes and stark warnings about cryptographic non-compliance, he had no idea what he was looking at. He assumed it was just routine automated spam generated by internal servers. He simply clicked the Select All box and hit Archive, completely oblivious to the fact that the 14-day clock was ticking closer and closer to absolute zero. By the middle of the second week, the quiet, invisible fractures within the corporate network finally ruptured onto the surface with devastating force. It started on a remarkably busy Tuesday morning. 3 of the largest metropolitan hospitals in New York City simultaneously attempted to initiate a routine, scheduled system update on their intensive care ventilators. These were the exact machines responsible for keeping critically ill patients breathing in the intensive care units. Instead of the standard green progress bar indicating a successful download, every single medical terminal across all 3 hospitals flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. A stark, aggressively bright warning message dominated the screens, stating, "Missing digital authentication signature. Update terminated." The hospital administrators were absolutely furious, immediately flooding the corporate support lines of my former employer with urgent demands for an immediate resolution. Back at the corporate headquarters, panic began to spread through the engineering floor like a wildfire in a dry forest. Trent, however, steadfastly refused to acknowledge the terrifying reality of the situation. He stomped into the main server room, his expensive suit jacket flapping behind him, completely dismissing the possibility of a legal lockout. To him, federal compliance was still just a minor inconvenience, a bureaucratic ghost he thought he had successfully exorcised by firing me. He stood in front of the exhausted information technology team and loudly declared that this was nothing more than a standard software glitch. He demanded they find a back door. He explicitly ordered them to bypass the authentication firewall and force the update through, completely ignoring the frantic warnings from his lead developers who tried to explain that the firewall was not a simple bug, but an impenetrable federal mandate. While chaos reigned in their glass-enclosed offices, I was sitting comfortably in my brand-new leather chair, watching the morning traffic roll by my window with a steaming cup of premium Earl Grey tea resting on my oak desk. My personal cell phone buzzed, vibrating against the polished wood. It was Marcus, the senior developer from my old team. I answered on the third ring, letting the silence hang for just a second. "Hadley, we are in absolute freefall over here," Marcus said, his voice tight with genuine distress and exhaustion. "The new patch is locked out of every major network on the East Coast. The system is demanding a master cryptographic key to proceed. Trent is breathing down my neck, practically screaming at me to hack our own software. Please tell me you left a backup key somewhere in the legacy files." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warmth was incredibly satisfying. "I am sorry, Marcus, but I absolutely cannot help you," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. "As of last Friday, I am no longer a legally authorized agent for the corporation. Providing you with any access, codes, or even technical guidance would be a direct violation of federal law. I highly advise you to get everything Trent is ordering you to do in writing to protect yourself. Good luck." I ended the call, placed the phone face down, and went back to peacefully reviewing my morning emails. Driven to the absolute edge of desperation and utterly blinded by his own towering arrogance, Trent made a decision that crossed the firm line from corporate negligence into outright criminal behavior, unable to legally authenticate the software with a human signature. He turned to his beloved artificial intelligence platform. He instructed the machine learning program to write a custom hotfix, essentially a malicious piece of code designed specifically to trick the hospital networks into accepting the update without a verified federal license. He deployed the artificial intelligence written patch by the end of the workday. Trent actually thought he was being a visionary disruptor, solving a complex problem with modern technology. In reality, he had just authorized an illegal cyber intrusion into heavily regulated medical infrastructure, directly violating the most severe provisions of the National Medical Security Act. The medical technology industry is a surprisingly small world, and word of technical instability spreads incredibly fast. Less than 48 hours after the New York hospital incident, my office phone rang again. This time, it was the director of procurement for a massive regional healthcare network, a very lucrative former partner of my old employer. They had noticed the alarming, erratic behavior of the recent updates and were incredibly nervous about their own legal liability. The director had heard through the industry grapevine that I had established my own independent firm. Within a single 45-minute conference call, I negotiated and signed my first major consulting contract. It was a comprehensive retainer agreement worth $250,000, instantly securing my absolute financial independence. I had just acquired one of their biggest clients simply because I possessed the exact legal authority that Trent had so casually thrown into the garbage to save a few dollars. Then, the inevitable mathematical certainty arrived. The 14-day federal countdown officially reached zero. The automated grace period expired. The government system responded precisely as it was programmed to do. A formal, legally binding temporary cease and desist order was automatically generated and transmitted directly to the executive inbox of the Chief Executive Officer, copying Trent as the Vice President of Operations. The document explicitly mandated an immediate halt to all software deployments and device sales until a registered compliance officer was legally reinstated. Trent sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing federal seal on his monitor. The company was just 5 days away from the Global MedTech Expo in Chicago, the most important product launch event of the decade, where they were scheduled to unveil their newest line of autonomous surgical devices. If the board of directors or the eager investors saw this federal order, the launch would be canceled immediately. The stock would completely tank, and Trent would be publicly fired. Driven by pure panic and an overwhelming desire to protect his fragile ego, he made his final, fatal choice. He highlighted the federal order, pressed the delete key, and permanently scrubbed the document from the executive servers. He chose to bury the warning, cementing his path toward absolute destruction, entirely unaware that the real, inescapable trap had not even been sprung yet. The Global MedTech Expo in Chicago was the undisputed crown jewel of the medical technology industry. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar convention where fortunes were made and lost in a single afternoon. Aegis was scheduled to unveil their new autonomous surgical robotic arm, a highly anticipated project expected to secure over $500 million in venture capital funding. But behind the glossy marketing brochures and the carefully rehearsed press releases, the Aegis headquarters was violently tearing itself apart. The demonstration devices, the very machines meant to dazzle the investors and the global media, were completely locked down. Without a verified federal clearance to initialize the core operating system, the machines were nothing more than highly expensive, extremely heavy paperweights. Trent was sweating profusely through his bespoke suit. The expo was exactly 48 hours away. His career, his stock options, and his entire carefully curated reputation were balancing on the edge of a razor. In a frantic display of desperation, he began tearing through the physical server room, a restricted area he usually considered far beneath his executive pay grade. He ordered his remaining technicians to pry open every legacy archive. Then, in the darkest corner of the server racks, he found it. Deep inside a forgotten, dust-covered fireproof safe was an encrypted backup hard drive from 3 years ago. It was a legacy storage unit that contained cached ghost copies of previous system states. And buried deep within those encrypted ghost copies was an old, cached iteration of my digital signature. Trent practically dragged Marcus, the terrified senior developer, back into the server room. "Clone it," Trent ordered, pointing a trembling, manic finger at the glowing monitor. "Extract that digital signature and force it into the surgical robot firmware right now." Marcus stared at the screen, his face drained of all color. "Trent, you are asking me to forge a federal cryptographic key. That is a direct violation of federal law. If the system detects a cloned signature, it will flag it as a cyber attack. I cannot do this." Trent leaned in close, his voice dripping with pure venom and absolute arrogance. "You will do exactly as I say, Marcus, or you will be clearing out your desk by 5 o'clock this evening. I am not losing a $500 million launch because of some bureaucratic ghost in the machine. It is just a string of code. The system will not know the difference. Extract it, inject it, and bypass the firewall. That is a direct executive order." Driven by the paralyzing fear of losing his livelihood, Marcus reluctantly executed the extraction protocol. His hands shook as he copied the ghost signature and injected it into the surgical robot operating system, forcing the internal network to bypass the compliance firewall. The massive robotic arm hummed to life, its sensors flashing a brilliant green. Trent threw his hands in the air and cheered loudly, entirely convinced he had just outsmarted the system, the law, and the United States government. He was completely oblivious to the beautiful, uncompromising, and highly lethal reality of federal cryptography. My security token was not just a simple password or a random string of alphanumeric characters. It was a dynamic, living credential. It was biometrically linked to my exact pulse rate and my specific fingerprints. More importantly, it was strictly geofenced by the Department of Homeland Security. Whenever my signature was utilized to authorize medical software, it instantly pinged a direct, highly encrypted handshake to the servers at the Federal Cybersecurity Bureau. This protocol was designed to prevent foreign state actors from intercepting and authorizing malicious code. The government servers did not just verify who was signing, they verified exactly where the signer was physically standing. I was sitting in my favorite corner booth at a local artisan cafe, enjoying a perfectly brewed pour over Ethiopian coffee. The sun was shining through the large glass windows, and the temperature was a perfect 72 degrees. Suddenly, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the solid wooden table. It was not my standard ringtone. It was a blaring, high-pitched, automated klaxon reserved exclusively for federal security emergencies. I calmly set down my coffee cup and unlocked the screen. A bright red notification from the Federal Registry completely filled the display. The message read, "Critical alert. Unauthorized credential usage detected. IP address traced to Aegis corporate headquarters. I stared at the screen, a slow, icy smile spreading across my face. He actually did it. I previously thought Trent was just a standard, garden-variety arrogant executive, but he had just willingly crossed the line into spectacular, suicidal stupidity. In a desperate attempt to save his presentation, he had committed identity theft, corporate espionage, and federal medical fraud all in one single, undeniable keystroke. I did not call the Aegis Human Resources Department. I certainly did not call Trent to offer a warning or to gloat. I immediately dialed the direct emergency line for my corporate attorney. We drafted a legally binding sworn affidavit in less than 20 minutes, the moment the document was notarized. I contacted my designated liaison at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrimes Division. The special agent on the other end of the line did not ask for my personal feelings. He asked for the raw data packets. I handed over the exact Internet Protocol address, the highly specific timestamp, and the precise terminal location where the fraudulent signature was generated. Furthermore, I provided irrefutable, time-stamped video evidence from the cafe security cameras proving that I was sitting exactly 3 miles away from the Aegis building when my signature was illegally deployed. Everything was perfectly aligned. The steel jaws of the trap had snapped shut, and the lock was thrown away. At that exact moment, Trent was likely boarding his first-class flight to Chicago. I easily imagined him settling into his wide, comfortable leather seat, ordering a glass of premium champagne, and looking out the window with a smug, overwhelming sense of absolute victory. He firmly believed he had beaten the system and secured his legacy. He had absolutely no idea that the very moment he forced my stolen signature into that machine, he had essentially fired a massive flare directly into the sky, giving the federal government his exact coordinates. He was flying straight into a concrete wall at full speed, and he was smiling the entire way. The McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago was absolutely vibrating with electric anticipation. Over 5,000 industry professionals, venture capitalists, and technology journalists were packed into the grand auditorium. The massive stage was bathed in dramatic, icy blue lighting, perfectly complementing the sleek, futuristic design of the Aegis MedTech corporate branding. At the absolute center of the stage stood the centerpiece of the entire morning, the highly anticipated autonomous surgical robotic arm, currently hidden beneath a heavy black velvet drape. Trent walked out from the wings to the sound of roaring applause. He was wearing his signature $5,000 custom-tailored suit, a sleek wireless microphone clipped to his lapel, and a smile so intensely arrogant it could have blinded the front row. He paced the stage with the practiced, predatory rhythm of a Silicon Valley visionary, spreading his arms wide to embrace the adoring crowd. For decades, the medical industry has been shackled by the heavy chains of human error and sluggish, antiquated bureaucracy, Trent announced, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. We have been forced to wait for human signatures, human compliance, and human limitations. But today, Aegis MedTech is cutting that red tape forever. Today, we are proud to introduce the future of autonomous healthcare, fully integrated and entirely driven by our proprietary artificial intelligence. The crowd erupted into another round of enthusiastic applause. The flashing bulbs of camera shutters illuminated the dark room like a frantic lightning storm. Trent turned toward the massive, 60-foot-high high-definition screen situated directly behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen, watch the future come alive," Trent declared confidently. He walked over to the central podium and firmly pressed the glowing activation button meant to boot up the demonstration software. The audience leaned forward collectively. They expected the massive screen to display a pristine, highly advanced user interface, complete with a simulated human heartbeat and complex surgical targeting grids. Instead, the surgical robotic arm let out a loud, aggressive mechanical grinding noise and completely locked its heavy hydraulic joints. The stage lighting flickered, and then, the massive 60-foot screen behind Trent shifted from a sleek corporate blue to an aggressively bright, blinding shade of solid crimson red. A harsh digital warning klaxon echoed violently through the auditorium speakers, completely drowning out the murmurs of the confused crowd. Plastered across the towering screen, in bold white letters standing 20 feet tall, was a direct, inescapable federal broadcast: federal seizure initiated, device locked, due to severe legislative noncompliance and fraudulent encryption usage. Trent froze completely. His practiced, visionary smile melted right off his face, instantly replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He frantically jammed his finger into the activation button over and over again, completely abandoning his cool, collected persona. "Technical difficulties, folks," Trent stammered into his microphone, his voice cracking violently. "Just a minor software glitch. Our engineering team is clearing it up right now." But the system was not glitching. The system was performing exactly as the federal government had programmed it to perform when identifying an active cyber attack. Before Trent could offer another pathetic excuse, the heavy double oak doors at the back of the grand auditorium swung open with a massive, echoing crash. The crowd gasped in unison, twisting in their padded seats. A specialized task force of over 24 federal agents came marching down the center aisle. They were wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Food and Drug Administration printed clearly across their broad backs. The lead federal agent, a tall, imposing man with absolutely no patience for corporate theater, walked straight up the stage stairs, completely ignoring the flashing cameras of the global media. "Trent Vance," the agent barked, his sharp voice carrying effortlessly over the stunned silence of 5,000 people. "Yes, but you cannot be up here. We are in the middle of a massive global presentation," Trent practically squeaked, holding his hands up defensively. The agent did not hesitate for a single second. He grabbed Trent by the shoulder, spun him around roughly, and pinned his arms behind his back. The distinct, heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs echoing through the live microphone was the loudest sound in the entire room. "Trent Vance, you are under federal arrest," the agent announced clearly, ensuring the media microphones caught every single syllable. "You are being charged with severe violations of the National Medical Security Act, the deliberate forgery of a Class 1 biometric national security identity, and the reckless endangerment of public health infrastructure. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you use immediately." The auditorium erupted into absolute, unmitigated chaos. Journalists began screaming questions. Investors were scrambling frantically out of their seats, and live broadcast cameras zoomed in closely on Trent as he was physically dragged off the stage, his expensive suit rumpled, his face buried in his chest in ultimate, crushing humiliation. The economic fallout was entirely instantaneous. The stock market is a highly sensitive organism, and nothing triggers a fatal financial panic faster than a live television broadcast of an executive being hauled away in handcuffs. By the time the stock exchange opened for morning trading just 20 minutes later, Aegis MedTech stock was in a catastrophic freefall. Within the first hour of trading, the stock price plummeted an agonizing 40%. By noon, it was down a staggering 65%. Tens of billions of dollars in market capitalization were completely vaporized into thin air in a matter of hours. Institutional investors panicked and immediately liquidated their holdings, while major healthcare networks began frantically issuing press releases distancing themselves from the suddenly toxic corporation. Simultaneously, the Aegis board of directors experienced a waking, terrible nightmare. These were extremely wealthy individuals who were currently enjoying their lavish holidays. The chairman of the board was playing a leisurely round of golf on a private course in Aspen, while two other senior directors were sailing on a massive luxury yacht off the coast of Monaco. Their satellite phones began ringing uncontrollably. They were forced to charter emergency private jets and fly directly back to the corporate headquarters in a state of absolute panic. When the board finally convened an emergency meeting and forcefully unlocked the executive servers, the true horrifying scope of the disaster was laid bare on the mahogany table. They discovered the deleted federal cease and desist orders. They found the frantic, buried emails from the engineering department begging for legal compliance. And most devastatingly, they discovered the exact date and time that Trent had officially terminated my employment, actively stripping the company of its only legal mechanism to survive. Trent had not only lied to the board about the technical readiness of the artificial intelligence system, he had actively hidden a federal investigation to protect his own fragile ego. He had genuinely believed that his executive title and his Silicon Valley buzzwords made him invincible. Instead, his towering, unchecked arrogance had not only completely destroyed his own career and guaranteed him a lengthy stay in a federal penitentiary, but he had successfully pushed a titan of the medical technology industry right to the absolute edge of bankruptcy, all before lunchtime on a Tuesday. Late that afternoon, the golden hour sunlight was streaming beautifully through the large windows of my newly furnished office. I was sitting at my heavy oak desk, peacefully reviewing a highly lucrative service contract, when my private line began to ring. The caller identification displayed a restricted number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end. I picked up the receiver and answered with a crisp, professional tone. "Hadley, thank God you picked up." A breathless voice pleaded through the speaker. It was Richard, the chairman of the board for Aegis MedTech Solutions. The man who usually spoke in measured, intimidating corporate drawls now sounded like a terrified captain going down with a violently sinking ship. "We are in an absolute catastrophe here. The federal government has completely frozen our operations, our stock is crashing, and the investors are threatening a massive class action lawsuit. We need you back immediately." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, remaining completely silent, allowing his desperate panic to fill the quiet room. "Listen to me, Hadley," Richard continued frantically, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "I will personally guarantee you a compensation package worth 4 times your previous salary. I will give you a permanent seat on the executive board. I will personally fire every single manager and vice president that Trent ever hired. Whatever you want. Just name your price and come back to save this company from these federal penalties." I let his grand, sweeping promises hang in the air for a long moment. I took a slow, deliberate breath, a genuine smile finally touching the corners of my lips. "I am sorry, Richard," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "But the current consulting fees for Foster Secure Tech are simply no longer compatible with your rapidly depleting corporate budget." "What are you talking about?" Richard stammered, entirely caught off guard by my absolute rejection. "We can find the money. We need your federal clearance." "You do not seem to understand the reality of your situation," I stated calmly, delivering the absolute final blow with surgical precision. "Over the past 24 hours, while your board of directors was scrambling to manage a national public relations nightmare, your 3 largest regional healthcare clients formally terminated their purchasing agreements with Aegis. They were terrified of the legal liability Trent created. And just this morning, all 3 of those hospital networks signed exclusive, multi-year compliance retainers directly with my firm. I do not need a seat on your sinking board, Richard, because I just acquired your entire revenue stream." I did not wait for his sputtering response. I placed the receiver down gently, severing the connection and ending my relationship with that corporation forever. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the large glass window, looking down at the bustling, vibrant American street below. The world was moving forward, completely indifferent to the massive corporate collapse I had just orchestrated. Trent Vance was currently sitting in a cold holding cell, facing decades in federal prison for cyber fraud and identity theft. Aegis MedTech was bleeding billions of dollars, forced into a total structural reorganization just to survive the impending government fines. I was no longer the quiet, invisible shadow standing behind the brilliant engineers and the flashy executives. I did not need an arrogant boss in a $5,000 suit to dictate my worth or validate my expertise, because right now, I was the one writing the absolute rules of the game. I walked over to the front entrance of my office suite. I picked up a solid brass nameplate engraved with the words Foster Secure Tech and firmly mounted it onto the frosted glass door. I stepped back, admired the gleaming letters, and took a long, satisfying sip of my warm tea. Everything was absolutely perfect. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for tuning in and staying with me until the very end of this story. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please let me know your city or country down in the comments section. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, I want to remind you that YouTube has unfortunately disabled our monetization, meaning we have absolutely no budget to continue operating here and will not be uploading any new videos on this platform for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning all of our operations over to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive, and completely true revenge stories that are simply too intense to make public on YouTube. You can easily join us right now by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we cannot wait to see you over there.